I'm going to do a series of video portraits of my artwork, and I'm going to start with the introduction. This will be the first video clip in a series. I don't know how many I'm going to do yet, but I want to start with this one where I'll talk to you about the work that I've done really over a lifetime, but over the last 20-25 years when I segued from traditional oil canvas to digital media, to the computers. By the way, that was not a transition that came easy to me. I had been working for 35 plus years with oil and sometimes also not just on canvas, but oils on sheets of acrylic and sometimes glass, large sheets of acrylic and glass that I would combine to make, maybe 8 by 8 foot paintings. At any rate, in the 1990s, I became interested by accident really in computer technologies, and I was living in Vermont at the time, looking for an opportunity to make some extra money after having left feature work and sound editing in New York City. And I bought a video camera and old computer, which I used to create artwork on a software called Lumina. I think 8 megabytes at the time was the maximum storage that it offered on the old floppy disks. The painting you're looking at now, I'm jumping forward maybe 30 plus years, or 25 plus years, 1990 to 2016, 26 years, represents the work that I've been developing that I call motion paintings. Now, motion paintings is an awkward word. It doesn't mean a great deal, except that if you look at it on a simple level, it means paintings in motion. Why would you do paintings in motion? Would you not then get animations or small documentaries or narrative fictional films and so on? But the way that I use the extension of the hybrid software available through computers, I see this more as an extension of the concerns, the plastic concerns, the aesthetic concerns, and the sensibilities that I've grown to love from the 1960s on with abstract expressionism and all of the wonderful artwork that's been going on since then. Because you have the ability with computer technologies now to incorporate various softwares such as Adobe Photoshop, After Effects, audio software that you can record audio, you can play music. I have a software also that I bought recently called Art Rage, which is not a very expensive software, but it gives me the ability to record artwork on a larger surface, and I'll get into that a little bit later on. But at any rate, motion paintings, because they exist in this computer world and they touch on the ability of the computer to use various softwares to create hybrid art forms, allow for the obvious introduction of duration in a still image. Now, on a simple level, of course, paintings don't move. On a deeper level, of course, they do move. So, but let's stay for now with a more simple explanation. Duration allows the introduction of time, obviously, and time allows the introduction of audio, of music, of sound effects, of narrative developments, of animation. But time can be seen in the sense that I use time in my motion paintings, i.e. as existing still rooted in the plastic concerns of painting. Time can be seen, or at least I would prefer to see it as giving you the ability not to change, but not to exploit this in a sense of narration or storytelling. I don't use time in the motion painting that I do to go from one condition to another condition in a sense of any kind of narrative development or arc of a story. If I did, of course, I would be bringing my work closer to filmmaking, and I'm not interested in filmmaking per se, at least not in terms of the artwork that I do. But I am interested in the ability of duration to provide changes in the aesthetic environment, and I do this through introducing, if you take a look at the work that I'm showing next to my image here, introducing motion and layering. Layering is, for me, works as the plastic reflection, image reflection of multiplicity of sensibilities. And so, because the computer, through a software called Adobe After Effects, or Photoshop if you like, and there are others of course, allow the ability to superimpose one image, to have an image on one layer and another one on another layer. You can have various things going on at the same time. I think what I find interesting in this is that for me, the image per se is never contained by the frame. And by that I mean that whenever I see an image that I create on any surface, be it a video projection through a projector or a short throw projection, as you see here on the Epson that I've got, or a computer screen, or a canvas for that matter, the image, whatever it is that I do, always leads me to feel that something else needs to happen. Now, there are two ways of working with this. And of course, it may be simply an insecurity with what I'm doing, in a sense that what I'm doing I never feel is satisfactory. But I think it goes in a slightly different direction aesthetically. I think for me, we live in a multiplicity of worlds now. We're no longer in, I mean, if you think of the Industrial Revolution, let's say that the Impressionist exploited the cusp of agrarian culture with the beginning of the Industrial Revolution and light science and so on, the prism, or if you go a little bit beyond, the Industrial Revolution with the development of an industrial aesthetic. Think of Mondrian, for example, never could have happened without the Industrial Revolution, because the grid pattern, the straight line, in nature there's no such thing. It only exists in an artificial world in industry. And I think the world that we inhabit now, that is in postmodern world, is a world of multiple worlds. You've got, I mean, on an elemental level, you've got, you're bombarded daily with news, with media, with social media, with the computer, with internet. And all of these, and space, of course, is irrelevant to all of that. They all coexist in the human being who is receiving, the receptor, another layer who's receiving all of this stuff. And so I think what happens is that this, in the work that I'm doing, is reflected. These contemporary sensibilities are reflected in the work that I'm doing. I frankly don't see it reflected in a lot of work, in a plastic work, I mean, in painting. But without seeming too immodest here, I think I'm developing a new language, or in the process of developing a new language. And So be that as it may, the ability to layer gives me the ability to introduce various elements and to create a work that exists in time, that has duration, that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, but not in a sense of a narrative development or a denouement of any kind, simply in the sense that it exists. And of course, anytime you look at it, it exists in the now. So I like to think it's a multiplicity of aesthetic elements that reflect any perception as it occurs in the now. And the now in our world, in my world, I think is a multiplicity of universes. So I don't know exactly where I'm going with this, but I just want to give you a sense of my aesthetic concerns, preoccupations when I'm working with motion painting. It's not just, okay, you've got a painting and you've got a face and now you want to add a voice or you want to add a piece of music. I think ultimately what happens is that the work that I'm doing is rooted in the same stillness that all good plastic art is rooted in. In fact, I think I might even argue that all good art, and I'm not making a pitch for mine right now, but I think all good art is in fact rooted in stillness, whether it moves or not, whether it tells a story. I think a great story will go to a layer of reality that goes beyond the movement that we experience on a daily basis. It cuts across and points to something that, maybe like Philip Guston, you might argue that in some way art exists outside of the dimensions of time and space. But okay, so that's one aspect of the work that I'm doing. By the way, you're looking at a piece now that I called Ma Monnaie, which is a piece that I'll get into it a little bit later on if I have time. I don't want these video segments to be too long, but maybe 18, 20 minutes or so, I'll cut them up. But in terms of this introduction, I want to give you a little bit of the sense of what I mean when I'm talking about the art that I do. Another aspect, I think, which is important, is that the computer, and I mentioned I started doing these in the 1990s, the computer is really still, for all its sophistication, a very awkward and dumb tool. Okay, now it allows for a lot of various, fun things to do and connections at a distance and incorporation of hybrid art forms. I mean, when was the last time that you really saw a contemporary piece of theater without media in some way, or animation, film, dance, music, performance, installations, they all tend now to incorporate at some level multiplicity of tools. Nonetheless, the computer through which all of this is often funneled exercises a very strict dogmatic control over the outcome, and if you're not careful, it'll take over. And one of the things as an example, what I mean by dumb is that if you take, let's say, I'll backtrack a little bit, dumb in the sense that it's a tool, not an instrument. If you take a piano and you hit a key, of course, the result is nuanced by the touch, by the feel, by the temperature of the room, and by a lot of different things that are almost, if not infinite, near infinite. But, if I hit F1 on a computer keyboard, I get the same result, or let's say a monkey hits F1, the monkey will get the same result that I do. And so that's what I mean by dumb. Another way in which it's dumb is it's rectangular. It exercises a rectangular framework, and any work that you see in the computer tends to be rectangular in nature. Elizabeth Murray would have an impossible time with a computer, at least if she uses it as a framework for her work. Because of the way the computer works in zeros and one, maybe you could say that the real work of the computers is the manipulation of digital media, zeros and ones. Unfortunately, zeros and ones are not particularly, from my point of view, aesthetically interesting. I guess they could be. Some artists maybe have worked with grids of zeros and ones, but I don't find them particularly interesting. It's how they translate into what colors you use and what forms you use and what shifts and change occur on a canvas, in a compute canvas, that I find interesting. But this leads me to, and I think it's important to point out that in spite of the introduction of connect and sensing devices and some kind of interactivity with your computers, and by the way, I know that this is changing daily, or if not daily, weekly, monthly, in spite of this, the computer is a better tool for design than it is for creativity. And so I think Hans Hofmann once said that art begins when construction ends. So the computers are great for construction. For art making, not so much. That's a difficult area to inhabit because its tendencies is to lock you into various manipulations that are great for design, but don't give you the freedom of gesture. Fundamentally, art, if you think of art as I do, as something that inhabits gesture, that can only be done with gesture, that is seen through gesture, that expresses through gesture. It does not have, to date, in spite of connect and sensing devices, the near infinite possibilities, play, if you will, of a pencil on paper. The infinite possibility of a piece of paper, crayon or pencil drawn across a sheet of paper. This is a thing of beauty, really, and irreplaceable. You can do that with various softwares that more or less give you some kind of freedom, but still, there's no substitute for that. And indeed, why would you want to substitute it? That's not important. If you want that kind of approach to the artwork, then draw and paint. Now, I happen to not only use the computer, but I also use a Wacom tablet that I've been using. Although it's one of the things that annoys me is to see how often the computer screen is understood as acceptable for an artist in terms of size. Size makes a huge difference. The bigger the painting is, I think not always, but it depends on the nature of the work itself. That's an idiotic statement, but in my work, the bigger the painting is, it's meant to be seen an 8 by 12 or 14 foot diagonal. A few years ago, I bought short throw projector, and what that allowed me to do was to kind of stretch and employ gesture in a more aggressive way, because the short throw projector, if you look at this, it has the capacity to go about 100-inch diagonal. And so, gesture is back into play in some way, and is that important? Well, to me, it's very important, because I don't like to work in a very small format, and also I'm used to working in a large format. And one of the things that also helps me, and this goes back to the fact that I feel, in a way, what I do can never be contained on one layer or in a frame as a still image, but needs some kind of shift or change. The size of the painting or the projection, what I do, of course, is I project my work once I've done it as a QuickTime movie or H.264 or MPEG-4, and I project it through a projector. The large size gives me the ability to think outside of those dimensions, or to look at one piece or one segment of the work and not contain all of it in the totality of my glance. I find that really important. And in fact, I exploit that in some ways because, for me, life is a kind of a thing that, art reflects life, but life is a kind of a thing where, okay, you look at a flower pot, you look at a nude, you look at, an abstract piece, and my mind then begins to, think of but I hear the noise outside, I'm conscious of my feet, there's a fly maybe buzzing around me and so on. And so there are all these distractions, and perceptual distraction, which in fact are emotional, psychic distractions. So if you think of artwork as a bundle of psychic energies, then these extraneous elements, little bits of pieces that move around, can be seen as like psychic manifestations of that reality for me, that it's nearly impossible, in fact, impossible to grasp the totality of anything perceptually, aesthetically, in any one hit, in any one function, any one way. I'm always like, oh, wait, something else is going on. So I think, just to get back for a second to time, so I see time in the sense of the way I work as an artist, not as a filmmaker, of course, but as an artist, two-dimensional or plastic artist, painter. I see time as giving me the ability to tap into aspects of now in duration, as they occur, not necessary, and these could be in some way unlinked, except by the fact that I'm experiencing them. I don't need to link them in, okay, I'm going out the door, then I'm going up my driveway, then I'm going into my car, and the car door closes, and so on. I don't need to develop a narrative. There's no denouement there necessarily, although you'll see later on in some of the work that I do, there's a fair amount of motion. I think the motion in a way doesn't move. It's like it stays there, but it has no significance aside from the fact that it's like a visual disturbance. Okay, so motion painting, that's, I guess, in some way what I mean by motion painting, and I will return to this in my next video clip. The work that you're looking right now, just a very quick word about it. I've been working on it for 4 weeks or so. It contains various elements. I've used in the background some of the stuff that you see going on. It changes in color, abstract forms. On the right side of what I consider a self-portrait was created in the software in an iPad tablet that I've got. Small little green buzzes, flies that are buzzing around. I see that as a continuation, maybe a reflection of the psychic disturbances that occur in my life, and I think in some way reflected in the work that I do. But there's also, if you can see, a kind of a strange face with eyes and mouth and nose and ears, and that was done in ArtRage on the software ArtRage on the short throw projector. One of the interesting things with that software is that it allows you to record the process of drawing and painting. And so I've done quite a bit of work where I do this recording, then bring it back into the computer, and then I use my QuickTime software to record the ArtRage movie playing back, and that gives me then a movie that I can actually use and bring into Adobe Premiere or Adobe After Effects. I do a great deal of work in After Effects because those of you who are familiar with it know that it has wonderful capacity for layering. Not for playing back in real time, but for layering. And there are a few other elements that are going on this painting. There's another painting that I had done on an iPad of a pond and so on, that and I'll show you, I get into that, the structure of this work a little bit later on. It's meant for continuous looping, continuous viewing. Since it does not have a beginning, a middle, and an end, it has a beginning and an end, but there's no development in this. The work that I do loops back on itself. Sometimes I create it so the looping is seamless. Sometimes I create it so that it's irrelevant to me whether it loops and there's a jerk in a cut. So I'm not too interested in that. But I will get into that painting a little bit later on in my next video. And so I guess that wraps up this first segment. Thank you for watching.